Though we don't often stop to think about it, the manufactured objects and images we see every day were all designed by somebody. And in the case of the best of them, that somebody isn't just anybody. With Thalia Assuras now, we take a closer look at the uncommon talent behind some of our most common products.
If you've ever visited New York, you probably bought a sweatshirt like this, a t-shirt maybe, or one of these mugs. But do you know what their logo has in common with this New York subway station? How about these pickle jars, beer bottles? They all owe their look to graphic artist Milton Glaser, a dapper uptown New Yorker. Never heard of him, right? Maybe not, but you have seen his work. He not only designs magazines and their covers, but the newsstands they're sold from. He's designed a tailor shop.
My father was a tailor. Of course, my memory of him was always with the tape measure around his neck, which is kind of the symbol of the tailor. And we ran it around the entire room as a kind of decorative motif.
He's even spruced up a schoolyard fence.
The principal came over and said, "What can we do?" I said, "Well, let's put a couple trees on it." Very often design is the art of camouflage.
He's designed books our kids use in school, CD covers, some of which were recently exhibited at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Also there, posters and portraits of cultural icons, Mick Jagger, Stevie Wonder. And remember this one? Bob Dylan.
I was really trying to evoke a moment in time and the feeling of the period and a person who had shaped that period in some kind of symbolic way that gave you an insight to the man and the music.
He gave Shakespeare quite a makeover.
There are only one or two images of Shakespeare that everybody uses as a reference. You know, he had a high, balding head. And so the problem here was to do a Shakespeare with enough references to that portrait so that you'd recognize it, but with enough departure so that it looks strange.
So you start from tradition and then you change it completely?
Always, because you always have to start with what the audience already knows. You start with the traditional and then you violate it.
It gives me the greatest pleasure to present Milton Glaser with Collab's Award for Excellence in Design for the year 2000.
At 71, Milton Glaser himself has become an icon in the design world. Despite his nearly half-century career, he never stops learning, or teaching for that matter.
Ultimately, you never master it, and you never figure it out, which is really exciting. The idea that ultimately, you simply don't have to do it over and over and over again because there's always more to learn. Design is not art. I mean, one must understand that there's a distinction between design, which has to do with planning and quantifiable results, and art, which has to do with metaphysics and spiritual consequences. So you can't get confused between those two ideas, although there are points at which they engage one another.
He outlines his philosophy in his new book, Art is Work.
I thought it would help everybody if we simply said that this thing called art does not exist in a vacuum, that it is related to other human activities, most significantly to work. And those things that are extraordinary and touch us, we call those great work.
Glaser first studied at Cooper Union in New York and spent 2 years at an academy in Italy. But his passion for drawing began when he was a little boy.
I was struck by the idea that I wanted to be an artist without having any idea of what that meant. The most important thing for a child, actually, in terms of their development, is making things, because that's the way the mind develops.
It sounds like yours is still developing and you're still a kid with this. You keep popping up with new things.
Oh, well, I hope so. Professional means to me not making mistakes. And as you know, anything that's really good or extraordinary or creative comes out of the possibility of failure. And so when you eliminate the possibility for making mistakes, you also eliminate the imaginations.
As popular as his designs have become, he hasn't always played to rave reviews. For example, Glaser says he's been called a misogynist, even a sadist, because of the plaster casts he included in his design of this Manhattan restaurant.
The critics totally misunderstood my intention.
What we have in this room are really all the things you would find in an Italian art school. You'd find canvases leaning up against the wall showing details of some kind. And then something that is perhaps understood is that all these body parts, these eyes and noses and mouths and even a breast over there, are the kind of thing you draw from when you're learning how to draw in an academic way. I love designing restaurants because as a social institution, they're one of the most interesting and complex of all social forms. And also because I'm very interested in the idea of pleasure and the relationship between art, beauty, aesthetics, and pleasure. And for me, there isn't anything more interesting than the creation of pleasure.
But even in creating pleasure, Milton Glaser will only go so far.
I've tried to avoid doing things that would be harmful to people because I believe that do no harm not only applies to doctors, but applies to people who are responsible for transmitting ideas within a culture, which is what you do as a design professional. And he's beginning to look a little more outrageous and funky. Yeah, see that? I think that drawing's better.
For example, designing a crest for a new vineyard to suggest that it's been in business for a long time. Is that okay?
I've done that.
Okay. Designing a package for a cereal aimed at children which has low nutritional value and high sugar content.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay. Designing an ad for a political candidate whose policies you believe would be harmful to the general.
I wouldn't do that.
But that leaves plenty he will do. He may not call it art, but you might.
When you sit down and you have a piece of blank paper in front of you, and then you create these personalities, and you can make them literally sit or stand or bend or talk, it's absolutely godlike.